Yeah, going to get a tardy slip.
In that corner, so that we have no one's here.
Oh shoot, can I do that?
No. Okay. So, sex determination.
What chapter is this?
This is chapter 15.
And this is the end of chapter 15?
This is the end of chapter 15.
I'm just gonna
Okay. So, in mammals, so let's do this. Build a little table. And in mammals, males are XY. They have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. And really the key aspect there is to have the Y chromosome. And we'll see this in a little bit, but if you have two X chromosomes plus a Y, you would still be a male mammal. Male mammal.
Oh.
Yeah. Female mammals have two X chromosomes, and really the key there is not two X chromosomes, it's no Y. Because even if you only have one X chromosome and you don't have a second sex chromosome, and you're a mammal, you are still going to be female. It's the absence of the Y chromosome. Okay? But this is for mammals. Not all animals are mammals. Hey, welcome!
Hello. What I missed?
You missed everything. And nothing.
Alright.
And everything. Welcome though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's actually like full today.
So in birds, males are WW and females are WZ. And so in mammals, the presence of the Y chromosome determines maleness. In birds, the presence of the Z chromosome determines femaleness. Okay?
So it's kind of like dominant a little bit.
You could look at it that way, that the genes that are being expressed on it. Now, it's not a normal dominant recessive inheritance because males are the only sex of mammals that have a Y chromosome. So any gene that's on the Y chromosome, it's not going to be present in the female. So it's not like it's dominant to what's there in the female. It's the only copy of that gene. And then for birds, it's the opposite. It's
So girls feel like so.
yeah, girls have something that male birds do not, and then males have something that female mammals do not. Mark and then Emma.
One thing that I find particularly funny, one of my friends, like he ended up just giving the word bird, like basically if you don't think you can make the word bird sound weirder, like that you would be wrong. Because one of my friends, he called a bird a bjord.
A bjord?
He's a bjord.
I love it. Emma.
Hey man,
Do the letters have any significance?
No, I mean they're not shaped like that. It's just no. Yeah, that's a good question. Not that I know of.
Isn't it like in the mammals though, like
Well, all
part of it,
chromosomes
like, the
are
chromosome
X-shaped.
X, and like the little like part on the bottom is like missing or whatever, and that's what makes it Y.
Yeah, but all of the chromosomes look like an X in mammals and in birds.
Yeah, but I'm saying like, because isn't that like the Y chromosome is like actually like a different like thing?
Yes,
And
yes
so
it
looks
is.
like a Y.
Yeah, it doesn't really look like a Y. It looks like a small bar. And then the X chromosome, when it has the two sister chromatids, does look like an X. But every other time it doesn't look like an X at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what my 7th grade.
Okay, so this might sound a little stupid.
Well, I mean, it sure looks like an X when it's got that sister chromatid.
She's
But
talking
so,
about the wash. She's like, and see if the X and a Y, you can see. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
all right, Issa.
I need to pronounce this. This is kind of stupid because I don't remember any of this. It's been since 7th grade,
Okay.
So, by X and Y, you mean the chromosome actually looks like an X or...
No, that's what Rick was asking here. I mean, all chromosomes really look like an X,
Yeah.
right? So when the chromosomes condense during mitosis and meiosis, they all look like an X.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to try to sell that the Y chromosome looks like a Y, it's a pretty hard sell. I mean,
And where are these X and Y chromosomes in the cell?
where all the other chromosomes are. Where chromosomes 1 through 22 in the nucleus.
Wow, they're teeny tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's 6 feet total of DNA in every cell. So I mean, collectively they're big, but when they condense down, they're pretty small. Yeah, if you were to take it and stretch it out, it's 6 feet long.
In that tiny baby cell.
Yeah, in every cell in your body. Yep. Okay, so reptiles.
Every cell.
Reptiles, this is pretty cool. They don't have sex chromosomes. Instead, cold temperatures produce males,
No way.
and warm temperatures
That's sicko mode.
produce females. For most reptiles. There are some reptiles where it's opposite of that, where warm temperatures will produce males and cold temperatures will produce females.
Dude, that's so
And then with some reptiles you get like a Goldilocks situation. If the temperatures are cold and if they're hot, they produce male, but if they're just right, they produce female. Emma.
If the reptile lives in a climate that's only cold, how do they produce other
They-
sex?
Yeah, it's a good question. You don't find turtles really laying eggs in places that are really cold, except for at warmer times of the year. But what it does, now most turtles bury their eggs. The deeper you go, the cooler it gets. They tend to lay their eggs in the summer, like late spring, throughout the summer and into early fall. The deeper you go, the cooler it gets. So typically the ones really low will produce males, and then as you start to move up, that ratio shifts towards females. And the eggs that are closer to the surface end up becoming female. Yeah, Isa.
What's considered warm and cold? Like,
It depends, it varies from species to species,
so
but
like 60.
That's usually would be cold and would
Really?
be would shift it all the way towards males. Now what's cool about this is the way sex is determined in sea turtles, that of all species except one are critically endangered.
Wait, but they're in the ocean.
They are in the ocean, but they don't lay their eggs in the ocean. They come on shore to lay their eggs. Okay? But so you can control the ratios by digging these clutches up and incubating them at the specific temperature if you need to shift the sex ratio.
When is the sex determined? Like early on, like
Oh, pretty early on.
yeah.
Yep.
So like as soon as like, for example.
Like within the first couple of days of incubation.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is a good question.
So why do we only know it after a certain amount of weeks?
Because you have to wait until the genitalia get to a size that you can see them on ultrasound. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, Michelle.
There's some reptiles that change sexes, like
Yes, yeah, and there aren't a lot of reptiles that do that. There are a lot of amphibians that do that, and there are a lot of fish that will change sex. Reptiles, I don't know of a reptilian species that will change sex, but there are a lot of frogs, and there's salamanders and fish that will change sex. Yeah, the whiptail lizards. There are no males.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. So this presents something interesting in that male mammals have a different set of chromosomes than female mammals do, right? So you're not going to get that normal 2 copies of every gene if it's on the X chromosome, right? May I erase these two? Because I want to focus just on mammals for a moment.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I want you to think about this. So what if the gene in question, if gene is on the X chromosome? If the gene is on the X chromosome, how is it going to be inherited? In females, you're going to get that normal Mendel's rules, right? The law of segregation. For every gene, you've got 2 versions of it. They might be the same, right? You might have 2 copies of the same allele, but you've got 2 alleles, right? And that works if it's on the X chromosome for female mammals. That does not work for males, right? Do you notice that would not work for males because they only have 1 X chromosome? They're not going to have 2 copies. Therefore, it's going to basically violate Mendel's laws. Okay? So if the gene is on the X chromosome, it violates the law of segregation in males.
Wait.
Yeah.
So sorry. Okay, so what do you mean gene is on X chromosome?
If the gene, the part of the DNA that codes for whatever that product
Yeah.
is on the X chromosome.
Then it's gonna be female.
No, well, male mammals have one X chromosome, but they don't have two. They only have one.
Wait, so
Males have an X chromosome and a Y.
so what do you mean by violating the law of segregation?
So the law of segregation says that that individuals have two copies of every character. And those two copies separate during gamete formation, and each gamete only gets one copy. Right? That's the law of segregation. Do you remember that? The word we used when I had you write this down, and I told you, Mendel didn't use these words because he didn't know gene alleles, but we use these words because it makes more sense now that we know how it works. That basically for every gene you have two alleles. And each gamete that you make gets one of those two alleles. That's the law of segregation. But for male mammals, they actually only have one allele for every gene that's on the X chromosome. They only have one, because they only have one X chromosome. They can't have two alleles, right? The only way they could have two alleles is if they had two X chromosomes, but they don't. They have one. Okay, so which means that if for every gene on the X chromosome, it's going to violate the law of segregation in males.
So
Because male gametes are either going to have an allele for that or they're not. Right? Because if a male mammal makes gametes, those gametes are going to either have the X chromosome or the Y chromosome.
Oh, so the gene can be on the Y chromosome?
There are genes on the Y chromosome, but there are also genes that are on the X chromosome and not on the Y. And so if a male makes a gamete and it gives and that gamete has the Y chromosome, it has 0 alleles for any gene that's only on the X chromosome. It doesn't have one, which means it violates the law of segregation, that each gamete gets one of the two alleles for whatever those genes are. Does that make sense? Okay, so because of that, we have a term for this, and it's this. Males are what we call hemizygous. Males are hemizygous for genes on the X chromosome. Hemizygous. What does this root hemi mean? Like a hemisphere.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
It's half. Okay? Like half of a sphere, right? Is a hemisphere. And so hemizygous, because they only have half of what you should have, right? You should have two alleles for every gene, yes? Everyone say yes. You should have two alleles for every gene. But males don't. They only have one allele for the genes on the X chromosome. So with regard to these genes, they are hemizygous. They can't be homozygous dominant. They can't be homozygous recessive. They certainly can't be heterozygous. They're hemizygous. Okay? And then if they've got the dominant allele, you would call them hemizygous dominant. They have the recessive allele, you would call them hemizygous recessive. Cool? Okay, I want to give you some real examples because you're like, this is all great, Dr. Eagle, but what does this actually mean? Okay, so the gene that a mutation in that gene results in red-green color blindness. Okay? Red-green color blindness is by far the most common form of color blindness. Yeah.
Is it generally on the Y chromosome?
No, the gene is on the X chromosome.
Oh, no?
Yes. The gene that, when mutated, results in red-green color blindness is on the X chromosome. However, how many X chromosomes do male humans have? One. Which means male humans have one chance to get an unmutated version of that gene. Right?
Which means they have a bigger chance of being...
They're much more likely of having that genetic illness than females are. Okay?
Wait, isn't it one chance though to get it though? Is it like, how does it work that way?
Well, they only have one chance to get an unmutated version of that chromosome. Females have two chances. Because all you need is one normal version of that gene, and you are not going to have red-green color blindness.
Okay. But why is it more likely to have a mutation than to? Or not like
It's not more likely.
What you're saying?
The rate of that allele is going to be the same for every individual, right?
Oh.
Think back to like population genetics. when we talked about the dominant and the recessive allele, P is the proportion of the dominant allele, Q is the proportion of the recessive allele. Every individual has the same probability of having one bad copy, right? Let's say 30% of the alleles are that mutant version. Every individual has a 30% chance of having one mutant allele. The problem is males only have one allele.
So you can't make up for
You can't overcome it by having one dominant and one recessive. Okay? There are no heterozygous individuals.
The body's so
It's awesome.
crazy.
But it's like there's so many things that could go wrong, and it's a miracle that most often they don't.
It's weird.
Yeah. So another one. I'll give you another one. Hemophilia, which is a bleeding disorder. And so the gene for a particular clotting factor that helps your blood clot properly, that gene is on the X chromosome. And you only need one proper version of that gene to make that clotting factor and to not have clotting issues. So again, it's another genetic illness that is going to be more common in males because they only have one opportunity to get a non-mutant version of that gene. Issa and then Tori.
Are you saying that females have better chances of being healthy?
Of being normal. Yeah, but normal is a relative term. Because you've got normal but carrier females. So because they're heterozygous, they're still carrying a mutant allele. But then you have normal homozygous individuals that are non-carriers. So normal is a little bit of an interesting term. Normal, we would just say they don't have that genetic illness, but they could be carriers for it. Sorry.
So no matter what, it's not good if any gene is on the X chromosome, but don't females only have X chromosomes?
They do. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying that there are different ways we inherit genetic illnesses. Okay? So I'm going to give you the four different inheritance, the four simplest inheritance patterns for genetic illnesses, and we're going to talk about how their prevalence varies between the sexes. So there's nothing bad about the gene being on the X chromosome. It just creates an issue for male mammals because they only have one X chromosome. So they only have one opportunity to get it right. Whereas females have two X chromosomes, so they have two opportunities to get the normal allele.
Oh, okay.
Right?
And that's just with mammals.
Yes. Well, and Drosophila, the fruit flies.
Those
Yeah. Their sex is determined the same way. Females have two X chromosomes, males have one X and one Y. Emma.
So if a female is a carrier of an allele,
Uh-huh.
can it just like freak out and she can get it?
Sure. Yeah, it depends on what the genetic illness is. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then there's another thing that you have to talk about that comes up with this, but we'll deal with that later today because we're going to do some of these things and we'll deal with something later today. But you might be looking at this and you're like, if males have one X chromosome and they survive, and females have two X chromosomes, you're like, that's really interesting. Because I remember, Dr. Engel, we talked about that when you have extra copies of a gene, that you've got a potential issue there. But we'll save that discussion for a little bit later.
Oh, but now it's a good thing.
It's a good... You got to erase good and bad. It's just a thing. Okay?
It's life.
It's just the way it works. It's a consequence of having sex determined by chromosomes. It's not... I mean, if you want to say it's good to have two X chromosomes, I mean, you can make that argument, but you could also make the argument it's bad to have two X chromosomes. It's not good or bad, it's the way it is. It's not like having red hair, that's obviously good, right? It's just, that's good and bad, right? It's good to have red hair, it's bad not to have red hair. But most things don't work that way, where it's not good and bad, it's the way it is.
Yeah, we're all in the cervix except the baby.
I mean, you all are just having to. It's almost like going through life being half human.
We're like
having a
we're
soul.
we're the inferior.
No, see, it's not true that redheads don't have souls. We get a freckle for every soul we steal.
Oh shoot.
Okay.
Yeah, Issa.
Okay, so
I'm scared of
May I erase this as you ask your question?
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So why do males generally why are they better at everything?
Why are they better at everything?
No. Don't. Okay.
Like what? Well, I mean, so the
Like,
genes.
For example, in track,
Well, genes. So yeah, I will tell you that the muscle production is heavily influenced by the amount of testosterone you produce, which is why you can take like a testosterone booster and then you bulk up even more. And so having high levels of testosterone leads to increased muscle production. And so male mammals, and it's not just for humans, but male mammals tend to have a greater density of muscle mass, and that's usually going to correlate to being faster if you train your muscles for speed, being stronger if you've trained your joints for strength, because it's just greater muscle mass. So, but there, yeah, it's different. I mean, again, it's not this issue of like good or bad. It's different. But there are a lot of consequences of having increased muscle mass. Males, their joints wear down a lot more rapidly. Oh yeah. But a lot of that has to do with that teenage males are significantly more likely to die in an accident than teenage females
Because
are.
they're dumb.
Yeah, well,
You're right.
I'm not gonna argue that, but we're not gonna really talk about that.
Hey, whose totaled their car here is it?
How many? Are we doing like a greater or less?
He has.
1 and a
How
half.
many of you total?
Well, he's had more time.
Yeah,
I have had more
That's because I get
time.
distracted easily.
we know.
Wait, so does it count if in an accident I totaled both my car and the other car? Does that count as
count
two
them up.
as
Why
one?
not? Yeah, count them up.
That counts as two?
Yeah.
Oh, then I got 2 of them. I destroyed the car.
One time.
7.
What is it? Wow. How do you have an odd number? Oh, one.
Because one of them it was a single car accident. I was the only one involved.
How did that happen? Yesterday I was driving home, you know, I had my windows rolled down, it was calm, and then I heard someone get rear-ended, and I looked, it was horrible. It was bad.
So I watched a big rig rear end a car right next to me on the 530.
Oh, that car probably went flying.
No, it was stop and go traffic, so the big rig was only going like maybe 10 miles per hour.
Still, mass.
But it
Force equals mass of
now luckily there was nobody in the back seat, it was just a driver in that car and nobody was really hurt.
That's
But
scary.
man, if somebody had been in the back seat and it literally happened right next to me.
No, but the car looked like a pug, like all squished up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I get it. Emma and then Mark.
Oh yeah. Why does the sun lighten your hair?
Oh my goodness.
I wanna know.
So there basically what happens is that the radiation from sunlight damages the proteins in there
Oh,
that are
really?
making up the pigment, and so when you damage that protein, it loses its color.
So it's bad for your hair.
It's I feel like everybody right now has a desire to just let's make everything a dichotomy. It's good or it's bad. And it's just it's the way it is. Like it can be bad, but it can. I don't know. It's not really. I don't know. That's hard. It's a hard. Yeah, hard.
I've seen
Hey everybody, Mark's talking, and y'all are being rude.
I saw I think they were on the feed. There's a truck driver, one of the big rigs, the 18-wheelers. They were they stopped at a stoplight. But
Yeah.
Something was wrong. It was wrong with something I don't know. But they just randomly started to back up. And
Yeah.
I was right there. If you're in the lane, right over.
Yeah.
And, the car behind him is honking. It's still backing up for some reason. And then you have kind of hitting the front of their car, tapping.
Yeah.
It's like,
I believe it.
square up on that.
Is this an A or an E? It is an A. Okay. So inheritance patterns. Okay, and this is what we're gonna do. The 4 simplest inheritance patterns to keep track of with regards to genetic illnesses. Okay? First one. Autosomal dominant. Nice.
Yeah, that's the wrong one.
Okay, autosomal dominant. Autosomal dominant. So the dominant allele let's say determines the illness. And because it's autosomal, that tells you what? Do you remember that term from Honors Bio?
I remember. I don't remember what it was.
Autosomal means non-sex chromosome.
Still cooking.
Okay? Autosomal means non-sex chromosome. So for humans, it would be one of chromosomes 1 through 22. That gene is somewhere on chromosomes 1 through 22. It's not on the X chromosome, it's not on the Y chromosome, it's on one of our autosomal chromosomes. The dominant allele determines the illness. So even if you only have one copy of that, you're going to have the genetic illness. If you've got 2 copies of it, you usually aren't going to survive past the gestation period. And what's that? So you want an example of an autosomal dominant? Achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. Small stature. Achondroplasia. Yeah.
Why is it hard for them to be pregnant?
It's just, yeah, I mean it's a developmental abnormality and it has a number of issues as far as the structure of your body is concerned.
So how can 2 little people have an adult?
Two little people.
No, that's
Because
So little people
because it's autosomal dominant, you only need 1 copy of that dominant allele to have the genetic illness.
Wait, no.
Right?
So
So yes, so I'm explaining how 2 little people could have a normal sized child. So you only need 1 copy of it. So if you are both monohybrids, then 1 out of every 4 of your offspring should be homozygous recessive. And which would be normal. Because it's the dominant allele that determines the genetic illness. So if you both have 1 copy of that dominant allele, 1 out of every 4 of your offspring should have no copies of the dominant allele and would not inherit that genetic illness.
They have 3 regular kids or normal sized kids and 1 little. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I mean it's just when you only have 4 kids, statistical abnormalities can happen. Like statistically if they had 4 children, you would expect 1 would be normal. But it's like if you flip a coin 4 times, you can very easily flip 4 heads in a row. Even though statistically speaking, you should have only flipped 2.
One of them, or they're twins. One of them came out small. One of them is normal.
Yeah, it's
Crazy.
okay. So so that's autosomal dominant. This one, because it is not on a sex chromosome, it's not more common in males than it is in females. It's not more common in females than it is in males, right? It's equal among the sexes. Emma.
It's not about this.
Okay?
Like, what causes Tourette's?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it was the first time you've said that all year.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never read about Tourette's. Now I can tell you, I'm almost certain it's not a single gene. It's not what we would call a monogenic disease, that it's multiple genes influencing that. Because if it was monogenic, I'd probably know what it was, but I've never looked into it. I can have that answer for you on Friday, though. Yeah. So autosomal recessive. Again, autosomal still means the same thing. This is not a sex chromosome. Okay? So that it's not it's on chromosomes 1 through 22. It's not on the X chromosome, it's not on the Y chromosome.
There's more than those?
Than just the sex chromosomes? Oh yeah. So we have 46 chromosomes.
Yeah.
So we have 23 pairs. So we have 46 chromosomes. You have chromosomes 1 through 22. You have 2 copies of each, one that came from your mom and one that came from your dad. And then you have your sex chromosomes, which for you would have 2 X chromosomes. There I have 1 X and 1 Y.
Gotcha. So that's 23.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So autosomal recessive. Now, it's let's make this very clear. The homozygous recessive individuals have the illness.
Because that's the only one that can have dominant.
Yep. So the only way you're going to get this genetic illness is if you have 2 copies of that mutant allele. 2 copies of that mutant allele. And because it's autosomal, true or false, it's equally common in male and female. True. Okay, you want an example of this one? Do you want 1 or 2? You want 2?
Sure.
Cystic fibrosis. And sickle cell anemia. There are 2 examples of genetic illnesses that have an autosomal recessive inheritance. So the only way you can get the illness is if you have 2 copies of the mutant allele. Okay? Which means you can be a carrier for it and have no idea. Right? Just like with Mendel's pea plants, you could be a carrier for the short plant and not know because you're tall. Right? All you needed was 1 copy of the tall gene, of the tall allele, and you're a tall plant. But you could be a carrier for that small one. Emma and then Isa.
Okay, I have 2 questions.
Okay.
It's probably stupid. Like, I don't understand how the recessive genes can be a parent. Like,
How they can be a parent?
yeah, like,
Well, only if you have 2 copies of it.
A parent, like APP or
Yeah.
okay. Well, like, yeah, I don't get that.
Well, it's only if you have 2 copies of the recessive.
But it's still recessive. I don't know.
It is, but if you have 2 copies of it, there's nothing to mask it,
Oh,
right? So recessive alleles are recessive because they can be masked by the expression of another trait. But if you don't have the other trait there, you can't mask it, right? If you don't have a mask, you can't cover your face, you know?
that's true.
Yeah.
These are hands.
You could use your hands, unless you don't have any.
Oh, bless that.
Okay. So sex-linked dominant inheritance. Sex-linked dominant. The gene is on the X chromosome. The gene is on the X chromosome, and because it is dominant, 1 copy is enough. The gene is on the X chromosome, and 1 copy of it is enough to get that genetic illness. Oh, I always forget the name of this genetic illness. Maybe it'll come to me. Because I know you're going to want an example. You're like, Dr. Engel, give us an example. Yeah. But I forget I forget the name of the disease. I'll get it for you.
I'm gonna write examples.
Okay. Yeah, you can write an example and leave a space for it. I'll get it for you. So the gene is on the X chromosome, and 1 copy is enough to have this genetic illness. Now, because it's sex-linked, it's going to be more common in one of the 2 sexes.
But
Kyle.
could it be both? Because both girls and guys have X chromosomes.
They do, but guys only have 1.
As we explained earlier. So if you have 2, you have like 2 chances.
So if you have 1 chance to get the dominant allele,
Your chances are less
your chances are less likely than having 2 chances to get the dominant allele. So these are more common in females. More common in females. And by what ratio?
Twice as much.
2 to 1. Because females have 2 chances to get the dominant allele, males only have 1. Because you only need 1. If you've got 2, you
Then what was
typically
the
have a
other
more
figure?
exacerbated version of that genetic illness. That was sex-linked recessive. Yeah. Yeah, Isa.
A little random, but you know when people have like the thing with their lip?
Cleft lip.
How does that happen?
There are I'm pretty sure that there are a number of causes for it. The most common is a developmental issue when you're developing the secondary palate, the roof of your mouth. So, but I don't know like what the most likely cause of that. I'm guessing that it has to do with the programmed order of events. Okay, so sex-linked dominant. The gene is on the X chromosome. 1 copy is enough. Sex-linked recessive. The gene is where?
On the Y.
No, it's on the X chromosome. The gene is on the X chromosome and can be masked. And whenever you see this term masked, and you're talking about in genetics, you think that the dominant trait can mask the recessive and overcome it. Okay, so these are more common in males. This is what we began our time talking about, more common in males. And it's approximately 2 to 1. Now it varies a lot from illness to illness, and I gave you a couple of examples already, but I'll write one of them down again. Hemophilia. Hemophilia. Which is a bleeding disorder. Yeah.
Is that kind of like, well, you know when people get really old and they like bleed easier and their blood doesn't clot? Is that
A lot of it has to do it's not from this genetic illness, but it's a similar process that their clotting factors don't work as well. There are a number of issues that could be involved in that. But yeah, so clotting, your blood clotting, as you can probably imagine, is a very complicated process. Why should it be a complicated process? True or false? Clotting your blood when under normal conditions is good.
Depends on how much.
You heard of blood clots?
Oh, well, yeah,
That's not good, right? You don't want clots forming in your blood when your blood's just moving through your vessels normally. You don't want it to clot unless you have some kind of a wound and you're actively bleeding out and you've got a clot there. And so that it's called the clotting cascade, and it's a very complicated process with dozens of different proteins involved. And so if any one of those starts to go wrong as you age, you're going to have an issue clotting your blood. Trinity. What's that? You didn't have your hand up? Oh. I was deceived. Okay? So these are our 4 simplest inheritance patterns with regards to genetic illnesses, but it could also be with regards to anything. We could say anything has an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern. Or anything has an autosomal recessive. It doesn't have to be a genetic illness. It could be something awesome, like red hair, which happens to be autosomal dominant. But it can, yes, but the presence of the red pigment is autosomal dominant. If you've got one copy is enough to make that red pigment, but it's very easy to mask it with the expression of a separate gene that is producing a brown pigment. So you could be producing the red pigment but never see it because the brown pigment is there and is absorbing the red light reflected by the red pigment. Yeah. Isa, then Emma, then Lydia.
So like would us people without red hair have a copy of that or no? No, right?
Very unlikely.
Okay.
Now you could have red hair and not even know you have red hair because you have so much brown pigment that again it's absorbing the red light reflected by that red pigment. Yeah.
And then what about like once again with the little since I'm curious. So how do those if both of them are little people, how do they have copies for like the normal types?
Because you only need one mutant, or you only need one dominant allele to have a achondroplasia. So if you've got one, now basically the result of that mutation results in connective tissue that's not built properly, and so you can't grow very quickly, and you can't support a big size, and so your body just stops growing. And it doesn't matter whether you have 2 copies of that mutant allele or you only have 1, you're going to have that genetic illness. And most little people are heterozygous individuals. They have 1 normal and 1 mutant copy, and that 1 mutant copy is enough to have achondroplasia. Usually if you have 2 mutant copies, your development is so complicated that it just doesn't work properly. And so that's one of the reasons why they oftentimes have difficulty conceiving.
And then with twins, like in general.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Are you talking about fraternal twins or identical twins?
Oh, is it different?
Yes. So identical twins.
Like,
So identical twins, the zygote splits, or it doesn't even have to be the entire zygote that forms immediately when the sperm fertilizes the ovum. It could be later down the line, where say maybe at the 64 cell stage, when there's 64 cells in the embryo, if you take one of those cells away, it'll develop into a second individual. And then fraternal twins, it's just two separate ova that got fertilized.
and it's not very common.
I mean, I don't know ratios, but fraternal twins are more common than identical. Emma and then Lydia.
I have 3.
Okay.
How? I don't know if this is true, but people say like if you have twins in your family, you are more likely to have twins.
It depends on the type of twins. Well, so there seems to be some genetic propensity towards the embryo splitting and forming identical twins. That tends to run in families, and there's also some genetic propensity towards releasing more than one ovum at a time. And so yeah, both of those would likely run in the family as far as the female's family is concerned.
And then if they're like a bad allele, can you just remove it? Is that not true?
I mean, we're working on that. We're getting better at genetically modifying individuals. The problem is we still don't understand enough about how genetic programming works to know all of the implications of genetic engineering. But I mean, that's what we do, right? We genetically modify plants, we genetically modify animals to increase meat production, but then we find out 20, 30 years later that eating genetically modified plants actually correlates significantly with certain illnesses. So then it's like, well, something we didn't anticipate happening. There was a Chinese scientist that genetically modified 2 twins, and before they implanted them in the mom's uterus to make them resistant to HIV, and now they're starting to say that wasn't the only thing that he actually modified, that he genetically modified them to be more intelligent. I don't know. Because intelligence is not, it's not like a monogenic, like you have this gene. So intelligence is not like there's like an intelligence gene, right? That if you have the smart copy, you're smart, and if you don't have the smart copy, you're not. It's not that simple. And so, but there are genes that correlate, or there are alleles for certain genes that correlate with higher intelligence. So, I don't know how much you said you had 3 questions.
Yeah. Okay. And then where do your tears come from?
Your
From there are tear ducts that are connected to your sinus cavities.
Liquid?
So is it snot coming out?
Yeah, it's mostly you use it every time. Every time you blink. Every time you blink, your tear ducts release a little bit of fluid to keep your eye moist. And then sometimes they can be triggered to release a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So is that why your eyes water when you
Yes, because it's connected with your sinuses. So when you change the pressure inside of your sinus cavity, it can force moisture out
I
of
thought
your
it's
tears.
because you were like breathing for a little bit.
Emma.
Okay, I have 2 more questions.
No, we can do the one more because you had 3.
Don't make him feel
Okay,
crazy.
okay.
Here, we'll do one more and then we'll go Lydia and then to Tori and then we can come back.
I saw like this thing, it's like this girl, she bleeds when she cries. Is it just because there's blood in her tear ducts? Like,
But she's kind of weird. And
she
Yeah.
cries a lot.
Probably.
That's a demon.
Alright, Lydia.
Lydia.
So, sorry, this is really off topic, but how can someone's eyes, like my dad, one of his eyes is farsighted and the other one's nearsighted. So how does that work?
It's one of 2 things. Either so after the point at which the tissue that develops into your eye split into the 2 eyes, he developed a mutation that carried out in one of the eyes and not in the other, or there was some minor environmental difference between the 2 eyes. Either one of those can be the trigger. It's probably a mutation that happens shortly after the tissue that develops into your eye split into the 2 eyes. And then any mutation in one is going to ripple down in that eye, but not in the other eye.
And then another question. When my siblings were younger, both of them had like really reddish brown hair. Is it possible like when they got older, their hair got just darker? It was like that?
Yeah, that it masks the red pigment. Yeah, sure.
You know, sometimes, like when you get really sick, I don't know if you get like sinus infection or something, but like the liquid that comes out of your eyes is like thicker, kind of like snot.
Yeah, it's got spent. Yeah, it's got spent white blood cells.
Spit?
Spent, S-P-E-N-T, white blood cells that have served their function and typically have phagocytized foreign material, and then they're basically your body's ejecting them.
Because sometimes they like come out, you get all like raw over here, you know.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah, I
That's
gotcha.
not happening to me right now. Don't look at me.
Just relax, everybody. She's not going to give you her eye boogers.
No, it's not happening to
And
me.
then Emma.
Oh yeah, I remember my other question, but I have a new one.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
But when you have a sinus infection, why is it green? Like your mucus?
Because it changed how
Why?
It's certain. It's certain cells that certain types of white blood cells after they've phagocytized material that they take on a greenish tint, and I don't remember exactly which one that it is. Okay, so real quickly, I want to run through the most common chromosomal mutations. Trinity.
So you know when you like sleep and you wake up and you have like this crying over like your eye?
Yeah.
Is that like where is that from? Well, what happens in your sleep? It like causes
Most often, again, it's similar to when you're sick. Your immune system reacted to something. Usually, it's an allergen. Usually, your immune.
happen like every
So then you're repeatedly exposing yourself to some kind of an allergen.
Oh dang. That's not good.
Okay, Emma.
Okay. Why is it hard to keep your eyes open when you sneeze?
Because
Fly out.
because of the violence involved in
Violence?
and that amount of pressure being shot out from your body. Okay. All right. First change in chromosomal number. Okay. First big chromosomal mutation, a change in chromosome number. And we have two versions of this. We have what's called aneuploidy. You don't like that?
No, I don't like the way you use it.
Aneuploidy. Change in the number of a single chromosome. Somebody give me an example here. You could be missing one, or you could more likely have an extra copy of it.
XX.
Third copy of chromosome 21.
Oh.
Yeah, because I could just come up with that.
Down syndrome, yep.
Oh, you're smart.
So this is, it's just down, right? Not downs? Down? Or is it downs?
I have no idea.
Downs?
Down.
Yeah.
Down. I think it says down.
Is it?
Down. Down syndrome. I think it's just down.
Yeah, I think it's
I think the S is just like blurred together.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
Down
Down
syndrome.
syndrome. It's like one
It's
word.
down, like
Okay, third copy of chromosome 21. Down syndrome. And the most common cause of aneuploidy is what's called non-disjunction. Non-disjunction. And here, the chromosomes do not separate properly. In anaphase 1 or what? The chromosomes don't separate properly in anaphase 1 or anaphase 2.
That's a part of the
Meiosis.
Are those two examples of genetic disease?
or of the annual.
Of aneuploidy.
Okay.
Aneuploidy is most commonly caused by non-disjunction. What non-disjunction is the chromosomes not separating properly in anaphase 1 or anaphase 2. There are several more examples of aneuploidy in humans. The most common forms of aneuploidy are actually not as obvious, and that's changes in the sex chromosomal number. To have a male mammal with 2 X chromosomes, so to have a male that is XXY, or to have a female mammal that only has 1 X chromosome, that is X naught, what we would call, or X0, or to have a female that has 3 X chromosomes instead of 2, or to have a male that has 2 Y chromosomes instead of 1. Those are actually the most common aneuploidies. Emma.
Okay. So like when you get X-rays, they give you like a little metal thing to protect your sex cells from radiation.
Yep.
Doesn't it affect your other cells also?
The radiation?
Yeah.
Yes, that it's actually taking an image of? Absolutely. But it's a cost-benefit analysis. There's a cost, but the benefit outweighs the cost. Okay, the other change in chromosomal number is called polyploidy. 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 Change in number of the entire set. Whoa, that should be an H. Of the entire, I'm going to say genome. Okay? Can I do that? So how many copies of your genome do you have? In a typical cell from your body, you have 2 copies of your genome. One that came from mom, one that came from dad. Polyploidy, you would change the number of the entire genome and you might have 3 copies. Or 4 copies. Or 6 copies. And the most common cause of polyploidy, let me write this up here so it's not so low. Yep. The most common cause of polyploidy is hybridization. And this is a term we haven't seen in a long time. Probably since November, maybe even earlier, maybe October. What is hybridization? When 2 species hybridize to form a single species. That's the most common cause of polyploidy. When 2 closely related species hybridize, and you basically get 4 entire sets of the chromosomes. 1 from each of those species that hybridize. Now, we use this in plants. Plants can tolerate this. Animals do not tolerate this. Animals barely tolerate this, and only in some chromosomes. Plants can tolerate this, and we use this to make flowers bigger, to make the fruit of plants bigger, to make them sterile so that you can have a seedless watermelon. Everybody wants a seedless watermelon, right?
Yes.
Alright, Issa, did you have a question? Oh, Carrie.
What's a genome?
The genome is the entire copy of your genes. So it'd be 1 full copy of all your chromosomes.
Oh, okay.
Chromosomes, shh. So Carrie asked, what's the genome? It would be the entire set of chromosomes 1 all the way through the sex chromosome. But only 1 copy of it. So every cell in your body has 2 genomes, 1 that came from your mom, 1 that came from your dad. And your 2 genomes are the same. Because you have chromosomes 1 through 22 and then 2 versions of chromosome X. So for mine, my 2 genomes are different. Because I have chromosomes 1 through 22, and then on one set I have an X chromosome, and then chromosomes 1 through 22, and on the other set I have a Y chromosome. So my 2 genomes are a little bit different. Your 2 genomes are the same, but we don't have more than 2 copies. Plants, they can have more than 2 copies. The current version of wheat that we use, I think is, it's hexaploid, and actually has 6 copies of the genome. Because we wanted wheat that produced a lot of gluten. Because gluten is a really nice protein for making dough with, because it's sticky, and it does make it more difficult to have things that are gluten-free and include wheat.
Oh well. I was gonna ask an Emma type question.
Okay.
Is a yellow watermelon a mutation?
That's a good question. I think it's a different species, but I don't know the answer to that question. That's twice in one day that I don't know the answer to that question. Okay, Emma.
Okay. I have a pair of twin cousins, and one of them has Down syndrome, and the other one doesn't. So.
They're twins?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fraternal twins.
So just like, oh,
Yeah, so they were formed by two different ova. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we have change in chromosomal number, and that's it. Are you okay? Any questions there? It's taking us a lot longer to get through this material than I was anticipating because I think we've had 27 questions.
Yeah, I have about 28.
Which is good. I like it.
Why do we cry when we're sad?
Why do we cry when we're sad? That's a wonderful question. It's a byproduct of your body not knowing exactly what to do because it's dealing with emotions that it's just that aren't normal, and so it happens when you're really happy or when you're really sad. I mean, there's not. I would guess that if I were to have to explain to it apart from a designer, like where all you have is natural selection, that you'd have to explain that in some way it either gave you a selective advantage to be able to convey the way you feel to those around you, or it's just an accidental feature, like it happened randomly by genetic drift. But I don't have to explain the way the world works apart from a designer, and I think it's something that God created so we understand how people feel.
Yeah,
it makes
feels good to cry.
it makes empathy much easier if you know how people feel.
Yeah.
And when somebody's crying, it's obvious that they're feeling very strong emotions, one way or the other. Tori and then Carrie.
How is it that such mental emotions inside of you can have such a physical effect on your
Stress. Yeah. So it just it's forcing your body to experience things for prolonged periods of time that it's not really equipped to do. And so then usually what it does is it gets your immune system to overreact. And so you get inflammation, and that has all kinds of effects. Did somebody else besides Isa have a hand up? Oh, Carrie and then Isa.
When you cry, your tears, depending on if they're happy or sad, they have different different chemicals, right?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because they have hormones that are being released to your body as a result of that strong emotion that you're feeling. So with incredible happiness, you release a lot of endorphins that just make you feel better. Like it lowers your heart rate, it just kind of relaxes you, and those would end up in your tears. Dude, we I don't think.
Like that. Lion King, that's the only one that's one of the only movies.
Okay. Changes in chromosomal structure, a deletion, loss of part of the chromosome. Loss of part of the chromosome. Loss of part of the chromosome. This is Dr. Engel. Okay, you bet. Well, you guys all can hear that?
No, I was just guessing.
Tori, you're getting signed up. Okay, loss of part of the chromosome. Look at this, a deletion, loss of part of the chromosome. Let me give you what this one is. Gain of part of the chromosome. Now I'm giving you.
Addition.
What's that?
Addition.
No, attraction.
We call it a duplication. Duplication. Goodbye, Tori.
Bye, thank you.
Yep, have a good day. So a deletion, loss of part of the chromosome, duplication, gain of part of the chromosome. You get a second copy of the same portion.
What's going on?
Obviously you do.
You don't need to know what's going on.
You gotta accept it.
It's just the way it is. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just the way it is.
Saying that. It's not good, it's not bad.
Dr. Engel,
Yeah,
I have a serious question.
okay.
Could you please?
Is this inversion? Is it an S or a T?
S.
An S. Yeah, Trinity.
Could you please maybe do chapter 16?
Get the title?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
My legs.
Okay, so inversion. A rotation of part of the chromosome. So you didn't lose any of it, you didn't duplicate any of it, but a piece of the chromosome got rotated around. You're like, that's weird. Not the whole thing. Because if the whole thing rotates around, it's really just how it's oriented in three-dimensional space. Like a portion of it, yeah, so a portion of it got cut, spun, and then reinserted.
And that would make the
And that changes things?
Well, think about this. If the chromosome were a book, and you took pages 200 to 312, and you reversed them, would it change the book?
Probably.
Yeah, it would change the book.
So they would pair up differently, right?
Tess.
Yes. Yeah, you're talking about. Shh. So Carrie just said something really interesting, everybody, and you missed it because you have your little conversations. So important. Okay. She said, would that change how the chromosomes match up? Like how the two versions of chromosome 1, this is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
How the two versions of chromosome 1 would match up? And absolutely it can.
So would there be mutations or would it just get confused because of?
It depends on a number of things. Yeah, there are a number of factors involved. Like where did it get cut? Did it get cut in the middle of a gene? Because if it get cut in the middle of a gene, now you lost a gene. But if it got cut in such a way that it really didn't impact a single gene, but it just reversed the chromosome, then it's going to have issues as far as how the chromosome pairs up with the other. Okay? All right. Shh. So what are our two changes in chromosomal number? Aneuploidy, polyploidy. What's the difference?
Entire
A
genome.
single chromosome or the entire genome?
Yep, a single chromosome or the entire genome. What are our three examples of changes in chromosomal structure? Deletion, duplication, and inversion. And there are more, but this is good enough. This is good enough for what you need to do. But you need to be able to think like, man, this is potentially a huge problem if we lose a portion of our chromosome.
Yeah.
This is potentially a huge problem if we duplicate a portion of the chromosome. Because we talk about trisomy 21, having a third extra copy of chromosome 21. There are only a few critical genes on that chromosome that if you have an extra copy of it, results in the developmental disorders that result in Down syndrome. Okay? Yeah, Carrie.
You just not have
An entire chromosome? Like you don't even have one copy of it? You wouldn't survive.
You don't have a full set.
Yeah.
You
Oh, yeah.
wouldn't survive at all.
You probably would not survive.
Where would it go? Where did it go?
But you could So very common aneuploidy is the loss of one of the X chromosomes. And to have a female that only has one X chromosome and doesn't have a second. And so functionally she's usually normal. Now there might be some developmental issues, but oftentimes there aren't, but she would most likely be sterile. Because remember we talked about checkpoints? Do you remember we talked about checkpoints in the cell cycle? One of those checkpoints, it works in meiosis to ensure that two chromosomes are lined up side by side. If you only have one X chromosome, there's no second X chromosome to line up by its side. It fails that checkpoint, and you don't make gametes. But other than that, she'd probably be normal. Okay. Now you can't be a male and not have an X chromosome. You can't be and just have a Y, because then all of the genes that are on the X chromosome you have no copy of. You wouldn't develop.
So much.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it. It took us about 40 minutes longer than I thought it would take us to finish up chapter 15.